Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup Champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
This is NHL Wraparound for Wednesday, January 14th, 2026. Vic Morren, Neil Smith, and, Neil, we don't like to pile on teams unnecessarily, and we did a pretty good breakdown and beatdown of the New York Rangers on Monday on short shifts. But after the game against Seattle, I think blowing a 2-0 lead, losing the game late, a rather listless crowd that was also chanting "Fire Chris Drury," we felt compelled to have another Ranger-centric show, and Vincent Mercogliano from The Athletic will be joining us very shortly.
And it's going to be very interesting to hear what Vincent has to say. He's at every game at MSG, and certainly the Rangers haven't been at every game at MSG. Their winning record at home is pitiful, and it's going to be interesting to see what Vincent says.
He'll join us in just a few moments, but first, 3 things that you need to pay attention to. And took a little bit of time, but the first head coach has finally been let go in the NHL. That was Dean Evason in Columbus. He was fired on Monday, along with assistant coach Steve McCarthy. And he was replaced by Rick Bowness, who is the 13th coach in Columbus Blue Jackets history. And you got to consider that the team only came into the NHL in 2000, 2001.
Yeah, that's a lot of coaches to have in, 25 years, 24 years. That's like every other year you're changing coaches. So, and they've been through some managers too, starting with Doug MacLean back a number of years before they even played in the league. Doug got that job, and then he was gone, and Scott Howson came in, and then Scott Howson was gone, and Jarmo Kekalainen came in, and then Jarmo Kekalainen was gone, and Don Waddell came in May of 2024. And the first thing he did was hire Dean Evason, who'd had 4 playoff appearances with the Minnesota Wild and done a good job there. But you know what, Vic? It's sort of unfair in a way when you think of the year they had last year. They had a good year last year under horribly difficult circumstances with the loss of Johnny Gaudreau before the season started in an automobile accident where he was a cyclist on the side of the road with his brother. But this year, obviously, they weren't meeting the expectations of ownership or the president and GM, Don Waddell, so the change was made. I want to just comment that I think that the reason why we're not seeing a lot of coaching changes is because everything is so tight. And especially in the East, where there's nobody that's really in it and there's nobody out of it other than maybe Columbus. And that's what Don Waddell thought. I got to get this thing back into the mosh pit. And the only way I'll do that is with a jolt of a coaching change. But I think that's the reason why you haven't seen a lot of coaching changes. There haven't been a lot of teams that are grossly disappointing what their expectations are.
A year ago, there had been 3 head coaching changes by this time of the season. Jim Montgomery was let go in Boston in November, and then Drew Bannister in St. Louis to make room for Montgomery to take over the Blues head coaching position, and then Luke Richardson in Chicago. But I think when you look at the Bowness hiring, he's 70 years old. He has spent more games behind an NHL bench as either a head coach or an assistant than anybody in NHL history. 2,727 games, including Tuesday's game that the Blue Jackets played against the Calgary Flames. So considering that there was no real history between Waddell and Bowness, are you surprised at this hiring, particularly that he's only signed on through the end of the season?
Well, the reason I'm surprised at Vic is because we had Rick Bowness on the show here last year, and Rick was very comfortable in the fact that he'd retired from coaching and was very comfortable in the fact that he was going to live in Florida with his wife. We see him from time to time on the TNT desk for those national games, and he does a good job on there. But it seemed like he was ready to say, okay, I've had enough of doing this. My guess is that just like Ken Holland at the management part at the similar age, you're out for a year and you think, oh, it's time for me to retire. You're out for a year and you start getting the itch and you want to go back and you want to keep doing it. And you miss the locker room, you miss the guys, you miss your assistants, and you miss being in the competition. And I would think that's what Rick came up with, because even if Don Waddell called him and he was totally comfortable and very happy just lounging on a beach somewhere in Florida, I doubt that he would say, oh, I'll give this up to go to Columbus, Ohio and start coaching a team that's in last place.
The message to the players was defense first. And we had made mention of how hard a time Columbus has had holding on to leads in the third period. They have left at least a dozen points on the table so far. And you look at how close the standings are, and we've made mention that Blue Jackets would not only be in a wild card, but maybe even in a top 3 position in the Metropolitan Division had they been able to hold on to leads. And last night, it looked like nothing changed except the end, because Blue Jackets got out to a 2-0 lead. They then got tied and took the lead again in the third period and got tied. But Captain Boone Jenner, with the game-winning goal late in the third period, managed to salvage the win, and then Jenner assisted on the empty netter. So far, so good, at least in the win-loss column. But as we saw on Tuesday evening, the problems are still the same, at least in the short term.
Well, in the short term, yeah. I mean, there's not much Rick could have done in the 24 hours maybe that he had to start to analyze the team and what to do. But I would imagine that Rick will find a remedy for it. If he's going to go defense first, it's pretty hard to keep blowing leads if your biggest responsibility is being defensive. I would think that the way you blow leads is you forget defense and when you have a lead, and that's what causes it. But we'll see. Rick's obviously a very tenured coach, and we'll see what he can do with these Blue Jackets.
Final footnote, that third period between the Blue Jackets and Flames, 36 total shots on goal, 19 by the Blue Jackets and 17 by the Flames. So not exactly a lockdown period by any stretch.
Not exactly. Defense first, but get 19 shots in 20 minutes.
Number 2, the Tampa Bay Lightning win their 10th and 11th consecutive games, 5-1 in Philadelphia on Monday, and then 2-1 in a shootout in Pittsburgh on Tuesday. However, in that game against Philadelphia on Monday, they lose Braden Point, right knee injury. He got tangled up with Cam York as he scored the goal that made it 3-0. So, of course, along with the winning streak and everything else, now you've got the Olympic controversy, which begins because the Lightning are not saying exactly how long they believe that Point is going to be out. They're listing him as week to week, which is a very safe thing to say. But now here come all of these skeptics saying, well, who are they going to pick? You know, Chris Johnson came on TSN and said that it looks like if Point has to be replaced, it's going to be a player with a similar style. Is that Connor Bedard? Is it Sam Bennett? Is it Wyatt Johnston? Is it Mark Scheifele? So watch for that conversation to continue to gain momentum as we get closer to the Olympics.
And there's 2 things here. Jon Cooper is the coach, the head coach for Team Canada, and Braden Point is his player for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I would think if I was Julien Brisebois, I'd be saying to Jon Cooper, could you maybe get him replaced by somebody else and then make sure that he's good for us once the Olympics are over, rather than have him go in on this quonky knee into the Olympics and maybe tweak it again and then not be able to play for us. Let's face it, for Jon Cooper or for Julien Brisebois, for sure, his concern is the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it should be really for Jon Cooper as well. So we'll see if he gets replaced. My bet is he doesn't play in the Olympics.
And then we'll see who gets replaced. I think I have an idea who it should be. I think you would have an idea who it should be. But we're not there, so we're not talking about him.
No, we're not.
Item number 3. Guess who is in the playoffs for the first time since November 7th? It's the Toronto Maple Leafs that, even though they lost in Utah big, 6-1 on Tuesday, they beat the Colorado Avalanche on Monday in overtime on a goal by William Nylander, and that ended the Avalanche's home winning streak at 17 games, although the Avs are still 19-0-3 at Ball Arena. But I think, Neil, what was significant about the Leafs waking up on Tuesday in a playoff spot, and they were still there on Wednesday, is that it was 67 days since they were last in playoff position back in November. 67.
Yes, just like the centennial year in Canada, 1967, which of course was the same year that the Toronto Maple Leafs last won the Stanley Cup. And that 1967 hangs around the neck of the franchise like an albatross for the Maple Leafs.
That's why we brought it up, though. Kind of tie those two things together. Thought we'd have some fun with that. So even though the Leafs lost on Tuesday in Utah, the Leafs were 8-0-2 going into that game. And perhaps you can couple, yes, maybe they were tired from playing Colorado, because I thought they did a great job playing at pace throughout that game. They did not look out of place at all. Maybe get into Utah a little tired, but perhaps also maybe a trap game against the Mammoth, because on Thursday, Toronto sees their own buddy, Mitch Marner, for the first time.
Perhaps the Leafs, too, coming out of Colorado, took Utah too lightly. And after a huge win against the lead horse in the race here this season, the Colorado Avalanche, perhaps Toronto Maple Leafs were going into Utah thinking that they were playing the Phoenix Coyotes, which they weren't. And maybe took my breakout player of the year a little bit too lightly. Didn't think about Dylan Guenther and the way this guy can score goals, and he did his magic again against the Maple Leafs.
So once again, they see Mitch Marner on Thursday, and then the much anticipated return match with Marner returning to Toronto will be only 8 days away, Friday, the 23rd of January. And that will wrap up 3 things you need to pay attention to. Now, let's welcome in from The Athletic, Vince Mercogliano.
And now with a special guest on NHL Wraparound, the man that covers the New York Rangers and the New York area teams really for The Athletic, Vincent Mercogliano. And for a guy named Neil Smith, I think I said that properly.
You nailed it, Neil.
Vince,
you got it.
Thank you for coming on here. You've got a day of running around, and we know that the Rangers play Ottawa on Wednesday. That'll be their next exciting game after the Seattle contest that they had. I guess I just want to start by saying, like, you've been around this dismantling of this team now for a few years. Where did it all go? I mean, they won the President's Trophy just 2 years ago. This time last year, they were still a team that teams had to worry about. And now they have stumbled down to the level that they're at, which anybody that watches them and looks factually at the standings has to say is disappointing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there, Neil. I don't know how far back you want to go. I do think that early on in Chris Drury's tenure, there were some attempts to make some bigger, splashier moves. I know Jack Eichel is a player in particular that the Rangers were very heavily involved with and very hopeful and optimistic. My sense was at some point that they were going to be able to get him. Obviously, they don't. He goes to Vegas. They kind of just proceed with the roster mainly intact from how it was left when Jeff Gorton got fired in 2021, which was a good team, not a great team, not a championship caliber team, but a good team. And they had some good runs, 22, 24, both those years they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. It is a dramatic drop. It is a drop that I think has stunned a lot of people when you consider, like you just mentioned, they won the President's Trophy only a year and a half ago. I do think, looking back on it, and I wrote a lot of this at the time as well, obviously, we were largely positive at the time because the team was winning at the rate that it was. But the underlying metrics there were some causes for concern there. There was some inkling that they were getting by and winning at the rate that they were, really that President's Trophy year in particular, for three big reasons. Number one, the goaltending is elite, and that's going to give you a chance to win pretty much every season, which has been the case for this team really ever since Igor Shesterkin arrived, and you can even go back beyond that, Henrik Lundqvist, and then your time with the team, Neil, when they had Mike Richter. But Igor carried them, especially that 21-22 season when he won the Vezina. Igor carried them a lot of nights. The other thing was special teams. This was an elite special teams team, power play, penalty kill, both among the top in the league that year when they won the President's Trophy. And a lot of their offense came from the power play, which has gone dry now the last couple of years. And then the third thing, that President's Trophy year, they had this uncanny knack. They had this resiliency, or whatever you want to call it. They broke the franchise record for comeback wins in a year that season. There were many games that year where it felt like they got unplayed, and yet they found a way to pull it out in the end. So they had this mojo going for them. They had the strong goaltending, and they had the special teams. But if you looked at the 5-on-5 numbers, there were things to be concerned about there. They were not a great 5-on-5 team, even during those years when they were winning. And I think deep down, there was some level of recognition on management's part about this. So what you had then coming off that President's Trophy is Chris Drury trying to proactively find ways to upgrade the roster, but he was in a cap bind and needed to clear space. So he starts identifying guys that he'd like to move out in order to free him up to maybe go and bring in some guys that will help them become a better 5-on-5 team. Now, where the mistakes happen, I don't think that line of thinking was incorrect, but where the mistakes happen is the way that those situations were handled. It starts with Barclay Goodrow getting waived. And this is a guy who, say what you will about his play, say what you will about his contract, he was a highly, highly respected guy in that locker room. A guy that teammates really cared about, a guy that laid it on the line, that played through some very serious injuries, that had some good playoff performances for the Rangers. And from what I've heard, and I know it's been reported and been out there in many different places, he didn't find out that he was being waived until about 15 minutes before he was placed on waivers. And that did not sit well with him. He's been a little vocal about that. And I know it did not sit well in the locker room. They felt like that was a guy who had earned a little more respect, who had earned treatment on the way out the door that was at least going to give him a fair warning of what might be coming, which he didn't feel like he got. Then the Jacob Trouba situation unfolds, and we all know that he was not pleased with the way that was handled, and his wife's name being thrown out in headlines, and the way that the whole thing unfolded. The communication was not up front, and that's your team captain. And so Goodrow and Trouba were, in the eyes of many players, not treated well on the way out. And you have a team that coming into last season was clearly dealing with some tension behind the scenes. And there were other things. I did a lot of reporting on this last year. I wrote a whole story about the cultural issues. This goes for team employees as well. You know, they stopped letting the social media team travel on the road. They're obviously, what we found out later on in the year was there were the sexual harassment allegations against Artemi Panarin, which had kind of been swept under the rug, but that also tightened the reins behind the scenes. And it just, you could feel it walking into that rink every day, that between the way that the players were feeling, the locker room felt fractured, the locker room felt tense, team employees felt like they were walking on eggshells. It just was not a great working environment last year. And so then you had the problem that we identified with 5-on-5, this team having some issues. And then it gets compounded by all the ill feelings that are going on heading into that season. The Trouba situation unfolds. Then Kreider gets thrown into the fire because his name is listed in that memo that came out 2 Novembers ago now, which I think was a big mistake on Chris Drury's part. he had to anticipate that was going to be leaked. Maybe he thought that would light a fire under the team, but it had the total opposite effect. Chris Kreider, maybe the most respected guy in that locker room, and you're dragging his name through there. And he, from my understanding, did not learn that he was being shopped around until the news of that memo came out publicly. So another guy where you make a misstep, you don't treat him the right way on the way out. Again, I think you can make a fair argument that moving these contracts might have been the right thing for the Rangers, but the way that it all played out clearly had a big negative impact in that locker room. And then the team crumbled from that point forward. We know last season goes down the drain. And this season now coming into this year, they're able to move the Kreider contract there. I know they targeted Gavrikov as a guy that they wanted to get. That does look like a good signing so far, but they weren't able to do enough to push this roster forward. And the flaws have just manifested and grown worse. They were hoping they would get that first year coach bump from Mike Sullivan. I do think that Sullivan, as far as the communication, that has certainly improved behind the scenes, is my understanding. The messaging, he has been an adult in the room. He has improved their defense. It slipped recently, but I think he's made some defensive improvements with this team. But the reality now is they traded away all these guys that, even though there were flaws there, they were also key players for teams that went pretty far in the playoffs a couple times, and they haven't done much to replace them. You look at trading away Kreider, Trouba, Gaudreau, Hedel, Kakko, all of these guys that were integral parts of those teams. Ryan Lindgren is gone. I mean, Keandre Miller is gone. We can keep going down the line. What have they replaced them with? What you have for me now, in my opinion, is a roster that has deteriorated and crumbled before our eyes. There were flaws before, but now there's just no depth. This is the least skilled team, in my opinion, that I've covered in 7 years on this beat. And the depth is the thinnest. Their prospect pool ranks as one of the worst in the league. We at The Athletic do a lot of work in that regard. They are not highly thought of from scouts that I talk to. And the NHL roster, I mean, you look at that bottom six right now, it's a lot of AHL caliber guys that they're dressing every night. And the top players that they rely on are all maybe past their prime is a little harsh, but they are not at the level that they were a few years ago. When you talk about Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, both those guys are having solid years, but JT Miller is certainly not having a good year. Vincent Trocheck has taken a little bit of a step back. And so the guys that you rely on to drive the bus aren't as good as they used to be. And the depth is the worst that it's been, in my opinion, 7 years that I've been on the beat. So now you have a recipe for a real disaster. And what they have to, I think, face now is the reality that it's time to tear this down completely. They've dismantled it over time with a lot of those trades that we talked about, but now they're at the point where they're clearly not good enough, and something I think more drastic has to be done.
Vince, we had made mention on our Short Shift show on Monday that I thought that this club was in the bottom quarter of talent in the NHL when you look at the roster top to bottom. And I think that was being generous. And you look at what's left. You look at what's been brought in. And I think Drury made a couple of sound acquisitions a couple of years ago, bringing in Kopp, bringing in Mott, bringing in Wenberg, who is now doing great things in San Jose. But aside from that, you look at this JT Miller acquisition, and first of all, we question whether he was captaincy material after the shenanigans that went on with him and Elias Pettersson in Vancouver. And I think the only reason the Rangers win that deal is because Hedel hasn't played since the second week of the season. So that's almost like a win by default. But on Monday against Seattle, fans are yelling, fire Drury. And we all know that Jim Dolan has backed Drury 100% here. But at some point, there's got to be the tripwire that gets hit and that says, like you said, we got to tear all this down. And perhaps it starts with the GM.
You know, listen, I think there's a valid case to be made. I mean, you just touched on some of the acquisitions that you thought worked out well for the Rangers. Every person you named was a rental. None of those guys were here for more than a few months. That's right. Objectively, if you're looking at Drury's track record, I think there's a lot of holes in it. I think there's a lot of issues. I would ask you guys, how many players in 5 years at the helm has he acquired that have had a long-term impact here? Meaning more than just a rental, more than just a few months. I can really only think of two. Vincent Trocheck, I think that was the right move at the time. They let Ryan Strome go. They brought in Trocheck. I think Trocheck is pretty clearly an upgrade there, a more well-rounded player. And the other one more recently is Gavrikov, and that's only been for a few months in and of itself. So they haven't done enough. He did not do enough over time to move this roster forward. All the core guys that got those teams to the Eastern Conference Finals were acquired by the previous regime. So I do think that there are very legitimate criticisms. And then we talked about the way that certain things were handled and the way that played out in the locker room. I've made the case, I've written about this many times, that I don't think he's done a great job. But ultimately, it comes down to what the owner thinks. And listen, these things are always fluid. It's always subject to change. Neil, you know this, I'm sure, better than anybody, that something could happen that changes this narrative at any point. But I have been hearing for months and months that Drury is safe, that Dolan still thinks very highly of Drury, that Dolan basically points the blame at everybody else besides Drury for the way that things have gone down, the players, Peter Laviolette. I mean, you guys probably heard that interview that he did last week on WFAN. Yeah. He basically said all the things that I've been hearing all along, that he still trusts Drury, that he's given Drury the keys to this thing, and that he's going to let him proceed as he sees fit. And you heard him blame Laviolette, you heard him blame the players, and you did not hear him blame Chris Drury. So maybe there's some level of lip service there, but again, based on what I've heard, I do not think that Drury is in jeopardy as of today. Now, if the season gets really, really ugly, and it's getting increasingly ugly recently, could that change? I have to think there's a possibility, but I can't sit here and tell you that I've talked to anybody or have any reporting that suggests at this moment that Drury is in jeopardy.
But Drury's also running Hartford and is overseeing that talent pool. And we've got this revolving door of Gabe Perreault, Bedard, and Brennan Hoffman. And that's the best of a weak pipeline coming in from Hartford and the Wolfpack. And now you also add to this ridiculous deal for Alexis Lafreniere that he's in the first year of a 7-year deal, paying him $7.45 on average. He's got an 8-team no-trade clause that kicks in 26-27. Can you see a buyout here? Because this may be one of the most useless players in the NHL.
I don't know if I'm fully on board with one of the most useless. I agree that he's been hugely disappointing. We actually did our midseason report a couple of weeks ago.
That dollar figure, though, Vince?
Yeah, I will say this also. The cap is rising. $7 million is not going to look quite the same as it did maybe a couple of years ago when the cap was flat. I think for a second-line winger, which is, we've seen him have one season where he was a solid second-line winger. Mm-hmm. He had that 57-point year in 23-24. For a second-line winger, I think $7 million or so is going to be the going rate as we move forward here. So if he can get back to that level that he was a couple of years ago, I think the contract looks fine. And I do think, listen, I actually asked him about this the other day. I sat with him at his locker, which was the same day that later on at the press conference, Mike Sullivan called him out, which was maybe it wasn't really fierce criticism, but it was very pointed criticism, I would say, at Lafreniere when he said we need more out of him at that press conference. I don't know how much you guys buy into this stuff. I think you have to take it with a grain of salt, but I do think it's useful and should be regarded to some degree. His on-ice metrics are among the best on the team, Lafreniere. Like, the Rangers have more puck possession, they have more shots, they have more scoring chances when Lafreniere is on the ice compared to most of their players. The point production is clearly disappointing, and I asked Lafreniere how he weighs those things, and he basically said, I don't really care what the analytics say. The points aren't where I want them to be, and that's my main concern. So I give him a little bit of credit for at least kind of, putting it on his own shoulders in that regard there. Listen, the contract doesn't look good right now. He's one of the big reasons that they're in the spot that they're in. I wrote about this morning. You look at the Rangers draft history, and when they went through that rebuild era, starting in 2017, they had a couple first-round picks that year through 21 when they took Hoffman. That's a 5-year span. They made 42 draft picks in that span, including 9 first-rounders. Mm-hmm. You could argue that not a single one of those 9 first-rounders has hit. Lafreniere is still on the team. He's had at least one fairly productive year, but he has certainly not hit the ceiling or anywhere close to it that people envisioned when he was drafted there. Same thing with Capo Caco, who's since been traded. And the only other guy remaining really is Brennan Othmann and Braden Schneider. Othmann has really stagnated. It's been a really disappointing season for him, and they've been shopping him around. And my understanding is that they're not really getting a whole lot in terms of value for offers in return. So all of these guys who were supposed to be the foundation of this team have not hit. So you got to point the finger at their draft track record for sure. And a lot of that is the previous regime. The only draft that Drury ran was 21. But even since Gorton and Davidson were fired, Drury has run 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. That's 5 drafts that Drury has run. They have one player from any of those drafts who has turned into a regular on this team, and that's Noah Laba, who's been, a solid bottom 6 center as a rookie this season, but that's a 4th round pick. You need to have a significantly higher batting average on your draft picks than they have had. And Drury's track record isn't good, just like his predecessors wasn't very good. You also have to point the finger at development. How much of this is making bad picks, and how much of this is that the Rangers haven't fostered an environment where these guys are going to maximize their potential? That has to be something that they're taking a critical look at right now, I think, as well. So to me, that track record of poor development that you touched on, that is maybe the biggest reason that they're in the spot that they're in right now. And then you factor in that there are all those trade deadlines when the Rangers were going for it the last few years, when they sold a lot of picks for those rental players that didn't stick around, and you're gutting your draft capital at the same time. So that obviously puts a dent in what you're able to accomplish from a development perspective as well. So that is in a really, really bad state for them. And that has to be an area that they do a much better job at moving forward if they're going to be able to pull themselves out of this.
Vince, I want to, you've been great. You've touched on almost everything I could think of, so I don't have a lot left in my gun to shoot. But I just want to ask you about Chris Drury in the respect that he was a player in the league for a long time, a Stanley Cup winning player, a captain of the Rangers. And yet he has been probably the worst I've ever seen at the way he treats the players. You touched on it. Gaudreau, Trouba, Kreider. I don't, that's the part that really confuses me. I didn't play in the NHL, and I never treated a player like that, ever. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, because that really confuses me as to how an ex-player can be so numb to the feelings of the players.
It's a hard one to put my finger on, Neil. And the reality with Drury is, listen, my interactions with him have always been pleasant. When kids are born, get a nice text from him, things like that. You run into him at the rink. It's always friendly. But he doesn't like talking to the media. And as far as hockey talk, that's not really a road that he's willing to go down and make public comments a whole lot. So we don't get a chance to ask him a whole lot of these questions. When we do, they're controlled settings. It's usually on Zoom. They usually cut it off after about 10 minutes. So that means each reporter gets maybe one question, and there's, they mute you after you ask your question. So it's hard to even get follow-ups in there some of those times. So that I think, for me has been frustrating at times. I'm certainly not afraid to say that. And so it's hard to really get firm answers on a lot of this stuff. It seems, though, that the way that he operates with the media and with not wanting to speak publicly a lot is similar to, at least for a while, how he was interacting with players behind the scenes. It sounds like maybe he was trying to go through back channels and not have that face-to-face communication or that face-to-face contact and be upfront with these players, which from what I've heard, that's the biggest issue that a lot of the players had is, hey, if you would have come to me and laid out where we're at, laid out the reasons that you're looking to move me, and we talk it all through, and we talk about places that I might be comfortable going, I think the players would have not reacted to it in the way that they did. But a lot of those things weren't done. Now, from what I've heard this year, it does sound like he has tried to make some changes in that regard. How far it's gone, it's hard for me to say, because again, it's not like we're granted a lot of access, at least as far as being able to talk to him directly. So it sounds like there were some lessons learned, and I do think that the Mike Sullivan hire in particular was aimed at improving those lines of communications. I mean, every player has raved about the feedback that they get from Sullivan and how direct he is. And it sounds to me like there were some hard lessons learned last year, and they are at least making some effort to heal some of those wounds and to be a little more direct and upfront with the players this year. But it was clearly a big reason why they crumbled in the fashion that they did last season.
Last one for me is about Artemi Panarin. Obviously a very, very highly talented guy. What's his future with the Rangers? Because there's no sense, obviously, if you're walking around with jeans on and a tattered coat, there's no sense having a 5-carat diamond on your hand.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Neil. Listen, I reported a little bit this morning. I made a call on Tuesday to a very well-connected source to just check in. Like, has the conversation been had yet? Have they approached him about A, are you willing to waive your no movement clause? And B, which teams would you consider doing it for? I was told that conversation has not been had yet. They're waiting. And this is the word and the sense I've been getting from the Rangers really for the last few weeks when I've been poking around on a lot of this stuff. They have been, I think, at least trying for the perception to be, and they want the players to get this message, that how you play this month matters. And if you guys rally and you string some wins together and you give us reasons to believe, we don't necessarily have to tear this thing down. But we all see what's happening on the ice. I mean, this team is playing, it seems like, more poorly as each week goes by. They were completely embarrassed in Boston on Saturday, which I thought felt like a final straw to me. And so inevitably, people that I talk to around the league feel that this is heading in a certain direction. And I have had indications. We talked about James Dolan before. There's a certain narrative that Dolan wouldn't allow any kind of a sell-off to happen. I've been told that that's not necessarily true. That, again, he seems to trust Chris Drury. And if Drury tells him the thing that we have to do here is sell off some veterans for the greater good, that Drury will get the green light to do that. So they have basically been saying we have not made any final decisions yet about whether we're going to sell or what we're going to do. I know up until a couple of weeks ago, they were actively trying to buy. I reported a couple of weeks ago that Kiefer Sherwood, in particular from the Vancouver Canucks, is a player that they were pretty aggressively trying to add. We've reported at The Athletic, my colleague Pierre Lebrun, I believe, was the first one to put it out there, that the Rangers were in on Quinn Hughes, obviously didn't have the ammunition to go and get him, but they were aggressively trying to buy up until recently. Now I think reality is kind of smacking them in the face. And I do anticipate, as I wrote this morning, that at some point that conversation will be had with Panarin. How can you not? I mean, Neil, you could speak to this better than I can, but from an asset management perspective, you have to get what you can for him, because I've heard extension talks did not get very far. I do not at this point see that happening. I think this is his last season as a Ranger. He wants longer term. He wants a higher AAV than the Rangers are willing to do. I think that was made pretty clear. My understanding is like back training camp time. And so there haven't been much as far as negotiations recently. So if you're going to lose the player to free agency, you got to get something for him while you can, especially if you're not going to make the playoffs. So they have to have that conversation, I believe, at some point. But as of Tuesday was the last time I checked, it had still not happened.
Vince, before we let you go, you've done a really good job illustrating just how far this club has fallen. And they're almost at the lowest point in the league standings as you can get. But is there anything to hold on to here positive in the immediate future with this club?
Whew, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
It's a tough one. I mean, listen, I will say that I think Mika Zibanejad has had a pretty decent bounce back year. He's not at the level that he was. I mean, when I first arrived on the beat, it was the season when he had 41 goals in 57 games, and he was just absolutely on fire when COVID put that season to a halt. I don't know if we're ever going to see that Mika Zibanejad again, but what we're seeing from him this year, at least from my eyes, is significantly better than the Zibanejad that we saw last season. So that's been a positive. The goaltending is always going to be the backbone of this team. I think as long as you have Igor Shesterkin, when we talk about the full-scale rebuild versus the maybe quicker retool that I think the Rangers are more likely to go down that road. That was kind of the subject of my column this morning. I think that Igor is one of the reasons that they feel like, hey, if we can reset this thing in a year or two, Igor will still give us a chance to win. So that's always going to be a positive for you. You know, like I think a guy like Matthew Robertson has been a nice story. I know that's kind of reaching down to the bottom of the barrel, but that's a guy who everybody had written off, figured he was going to maybe be a career minor leaguer, certainly wasn't going to get a chance with New York. And I think he's been a solid bottom pair defenseman for them. there's a few other little silver linings. Noah Laba, we talked about. I think he looks like a guy that could be a solid bottom six center for you. The young guys, though, that is, they need more out of some of these young guys, and there's just not a whole lot to feel promising about right now. And then, Panarin might be on his way out. Miller has been a disappointment. A lot of the veteran guys just haven't been there. I did think Adam Fox was having a really nice bounce back season until the injuries disrupted it. But that's another guy now the Rangers are without, so it's hard to really look at that as a positive. So, maybe I'm grasping for straws here, but those are just a few of the things that come to mind. I will say this. I do think Mike Sullivan, as far as the way that he's handling his business and what I'm observing behind the scenes, he's the coach that I would feel most confident in of the four coaches that I've covered: Quinn, Gallant, and Laviolette, and now Sullivan. To me, I think they're in pretty good hands from a coaching standpoint. The roster just needs to improve.
Any update on Adam Fox or Igor Shesterkin?
Still not skating, so it's going to be a little while for both of them. I mean, Fox can't come back till the end of the month anyway because he's on LTIR. Igor, though, Sullivan said he's still not skating. I don't want to report this definitively, but he does have a history of groin injuries, and I've heard from people who think that might have been what this is. So that's delicate. That's kind of fluid. You got to see how that goes. You can't rush him back in a situation like that. So Igor, I think they're expecting back maybe a little bit sooner than Fox, but it's going to be at least another week or so, I think, for both of them. Well, Fox, like I said, not till the end of the month.
And two quick things on Fox, a former Norris Trophy winner. You mentioned before, and everybody has said this, that they were in the Quinn Hughes sweepstakes. And Adam Fox plays for the New York Rangers, whose head coach is Mike Sullivan, who happens to also be the head coach of Team USA at the Olympics. Drury is one of the assistant GMs of Team USA at the Olympics. Adam Fox gets left off the roster for Team USA at the Olympics, as well as knowing that they were probably trying to get Quinn Hughes, which means where would he play if they got Quinn Hughes? This has got to not feel good for Adam Fox.
Yeah, the Hughes thing, I don't know if that's as big of a deal as the Olympic thing. I mean, listen, I know a lot of people assume that because you have Hughes, that means Fox might not be on the top power play, but I wouldn't have been surprised if the Rangers tried a power play with both of those guys on it had they gotten them. So I don't think that was a deal breaker. I think that they were just thinking, hey, we could have a really dynamic blue line with both of those guys. But the Olympic thing, yes, that certainly did not sit well with Fox. I've heard that most of his disappointment is probably directed at Bill Guerin, who we know had the final say. And I've also heard that Guerin really, after what he saw at Four Nations last year, was pretty close-minded, I guess I'll say, to having Fox on the roster. It sounded like that left a really bad taste in his mouth. But there has to be some level of curiosity about, okay, but how does this affect his relationship with Sullivan and Drury? Could they have done more to try to fight to get him on that roster? I don't know what the answer to that is. That would be pure speculation on my part, but I know that everything that went into that is probably not sitting well with Fox at this moment. And so, yeah, I think there is some smoothing over to do there for sure.
Vince, thank you so much for all this. There seems to be a lot of smoothing over to go on with the Rangers. A lot of sandpaper going to be needed to smooth out all these wrinkles that they've got right now. And boy, oh boy, I can't imagine having this much. This is just an infestation of problems with the team. But you've done a wonderful job of outlining everything going on there, and you've really educated me to a lot of different things. And thank you for doing this for us today.
I appreciate you having me on, Neil. I would love to, maybe we'll do this on my podcast in the future. I would love to have you on and pick your brain about, okay, if you were in this spot, what would you do? Because I think that's really where the conversation is going to be focused in the coming months.
And it's going to be a difficult questions to answer, because I've had somebody say to me, could you write a column for me about what you would do if you took over the Rangers? And I don't think I could do it. I just would say, no, I got a good podcast right now. I don't need that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in a tough spot. I would say talking into the mic is a little bit easier than navigating what they're going to have to navigate.
Yeah. So thanks again, Vince.
Sure.
We want to get you out of here so you can move on to your daytime job, but you've really been great.
No, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vince. Buddy boy, that was a lot to unpack. And I thought Vincent was outstanding, really pulling the guts out of this thing. And when you see what's left, my last question was, what do you see in terms of promise? And when you start to get to Matthew Robertson, you know you're scraping pretty low when you're talking about your third pair defenseman.
Yeah, and I mean, for all the promise that Gabe Perreault had before he came up, and that he was, don't ever trade him, don't let him go, don't let anybody try to get him away from you. That has been disappointing, I would think, to the fans. But back to Vince, he was tremendous, and he completely colored in all that needed coloring in on this coloring book of the Rangers. He really did. I mean, I thought that he gave a very illustrative view of what is going on with that franchise.
Outstanding job. And, we did it a year ago with Pittsburgh. We did it at the beginning of this year, frankly, with Buffalo before they got hot. And we're not afraid to go into these difficult places, because the truth is you can't have 32 teams that are going to win. And you're going to have clubs that go through periods like the New York Rangers are going through right now, like Pittsburgh has gone through, that Chicago has gone through, that San Jose has gone through.
I don't think you ever need to worry when your opinion is based on fact. I think where you can get in trouble is when your opinion is based on emotion and based on things other than fact. And if you look at the standings, it speaks for itself. Now we're trying to find out, why do the standings look that way? Why is the team not winning? Why is this? And I thought he did a great job of illustrating that for the listeners.
Last in the Eastern Conference, entering play on Wednesday. Let's look at some other items that we think you will find of interest. And we mentioned the Tampa Bay Lightning in our 3 Things segment, winning their 10th and 11th consecutive games. And in the Monday game at Philadelphia, Jon Cooper reaches 600 career wins in only 1,005 games. Only Scotty Bowman did it quicker, and that was 1,002 games. This is a guy that has never won the Jack Adams Award, but I think we have to say this may be his best coaching job this season, with the amount of injuries that the Lightning have gone through, both on the forward position, their back line. Vasilevsky has missed some time, and they enter play on Wednesday atop the Atlantic Division with 61 points.
Let me just make a comment about Scotty Bowman and his 600 wins in 1,002 games. Scotty's career was with some pretty good teams. He started in the expansion era with the St. Louis Blues, who did not win the West in the regular season in the first year, 67-68, but did get to the final, only to be defeated by Montreal. They got to the final again the second year, which would be 68-69, and again were defeated by the Montreal Canadiens. And then in 69-70, with Bobby Orr flying through the air in front of Glenn Hall, being tripped by Noel Picard, they lost again. But those were Scotty's first, 3 teams. He went from that to Montreal Canadiens and coached one of the most dominant teams in the history of the league in the Montreal Canadiens, who won 4 consecutive cups, 76, 77, 78, and 79. And so he had I'd say better teams than Jon Cooper has had in Tampa, even though Jon Cooper's won 2 Stanley Cups and won a President's Trophy and so on. I think Scotty just had more dominant teams, probably the most dominant teams of any coach has ever had. And it's a great kudo to Jon Cooper to reach that many wins in that long. And really, isn't it nice to see a team that stays with the same coach for years instead of keep changing and changing and changing? And they could have changed Jon Cooper when they won the President's Trophy and were eliminated 4 straight by John Tortorella and the Columbus Blue Jackets.
They could have, but I think that was part of the learning curve, as hard as it was for them. And of course, they responded with consecutive Stanley Cups. And I just want to go back to Bowman for a second, because He had very good teams when he coached in Buffalo. And we also know that he took over for Bob Johnson. After Johnson won the Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh in 91, Johnson died in the fall of that year. Bowman took over, won the cup with Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, Ron Francis, and a host of other stars on that team. And, of course, won with the Detroit Red Wings as well, which was also a superstar-laden club. So Scotty certainly had an abundance of riches, and not to say that Cooper hasn't, with the likes of Nikita Kucherov and Steven Stamkos and Victor Hedman, but certainly not to the degree that Bowman was surrounded with.
No, neither of these coaches have won with Cinderella teams. It's not like Scotty Bowman led the St. Louis Blues in 2019 to the Stanley Cup the way that Craig Berube did. Now, Craig Berube doesn't have 7 Stanley Cups like Scotty Bowman as a coach, but he has that one Cinderella Cup, I would call it, because Boston was clearly the favorite that year. And again, we're talking about Jon Cooper and the marvelous job he's done in Tampa, which he has. And but he is up there in that group, that Hockey Hall of Fame group with Scotty Bowman.
Taking a break from the coaching ranks, Gerard Gallant, who was actually coaching in the Continental Hockey League, and he has been coaching with the Shanghai Dragons, took the job last August, but after consulting with his doctors, he's stepping away, citing health reasons. So he's going back home to Prince Edward Island. He's coached 705 games in his NHL career, last coaching in the NHL with the Rangers in the 2022-23 season. Remember, they had made the conference finals against Tampa Bay in 22 and then lost in 7 games to the Devils the following year and then was dismissed by GM Chris Drury.
Yeah, and he's done a very good job every place he's gone, to be honest with you. He did a good job in Florida. Got left at the side of the road in Carolina by the Panthers way back then. I think Tom Rowe was the GM of Florida at that particular time. He went from there to the Golden Knights and, of course, took an expansion team to the finals their first year in the league. And then after that, his next chance was with the Rangers and had 2 over 100-point seasons with the Rangers. But after getting eliminated, as you said, by the Devils, for some reason, inexplicably, they decided that he wasn't the guy and that they would move on from him to Peter Laviolette. And, of course, Peter Laviolette was let go as well to make room for the now bench boss, Mike Sullivan.
Let's move on. But we're going to stay in New York because Buffalo has been named to host the 2026 NHL entry draft, be held at KeyBank Center, June 26th and 27th. And it will be a decentralized draft for the second straight year. And not too many people were really happy the way things looked a year ago after having been in the sphere in 2024. But this will be the 4th time that Buffalo hosts the draft. They did so before in 1991, 1998, and 2016. And the first overall picks in those drafts, Eric Lindros, 91, Vinny Lecavalier, 98, and Auston Matthews in 2016. And, of course, Gavin McKenna, Penn State freshman, will be the top prospect this year. And guess what term we're going to hear again? Generational player.
Oh, gosh. Well, Eric Lindros was a generational player. I don't think Vincent Lecavalier was, although he was a great player. Great for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Captained them to their very first Stanley Cup. And Auston Matthews, is he a generational player? I mean, he's a generational goal scorer, or he was. But they throw that term around now. Like every year, there's the top guy is a generational player.
Yeah, they do. And I think you can make arguments that when these players came into the league, Lindros, where nobody had seen the combination of skill, power, and speed when he came in. And even Bobby Clark had said that Lindros could have played in the NHL when he was 16. And when Auston Matthews came in, I think he had that title as well. And of course, in his very first NHL game in Ottawa, he scored 4 goals and is now over 400 for his career.
Yeah, and he is the leading all-time goal scorer of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have been around for centuries, it seems like. Not really, but they've been around since 1917. So, it'll be interesting to see the Gavin McKinnon and how he stacks up against the recent ones, the recent picks that we've had, Connor Bedard and so on. So it'll all take place at the KeyBank Center, June 26th and 27th.
Macklin Celebrini, we should obviously throw into that mix, who is having a marvelous year, Canadian Olympian, but even as great as he's been, I don't put him in that generational category like not only the players that we just mentioned in Lindros and Matthews, but we had a whole discussion with Stan Fischler about that. And so once again, we're going to hear generational player, and I just take it with a grain of salt until I really see it.
Well, it's also marketing. It's marketing. It's teams saying this is a generational player. Come buy tickets, buy jerseys, buy this, buy that. I mean, even Vincent Lecavalier. Do you remember at the time that they drafted him? I forget who the owner was, but he called him the Michael Jordan of hockey. Talk about putting pressure on an 18-year-old.
Glad we expounded on that a little bit further. So we know that the KeyBank Center is going to be standing. But let's shift over to Europe, where the main rink in Milan-Cortina is coming right down to the wire. And the Olympics are 4 weeks away, and everybody's putting on the happy face that the rink will be ready, the event is going to be great. But Chris Johnson from TSN was over there, and he said this is still a construction site, that the ice apparently is coming along, but there was also that picture about a week ago where they had to stop a game because there was a hole in the ice. The locker rooms aren't ready yet. And Milan-Cortina was granted the Olympics in June of 2019. So they have had 6.5 years to get this building ready to play, and that it's coming down to the wire is an absolute embarrassment. And the reason that I bring this up is because 94.5 years ago, Maple Leaf Gardens was constructed in 6 months.
During the Depression.
During the Depression.
And was built for $1 million Canadian at that time. Yep. It was amazing. People wanted work because of the Depression in Toronto area. They signed up and they just kept going at it. And in 6 months built Maple Leaf Gardens. And of course, the man who scored the very first goal for the Toronto Maple Leafs in that Maple Leaf Gardens was none other than Charlie Conacher.
Maybe Charlie Conacher can help with the rest of the construction now in Italy. It's, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about it, because it's something that should have been done a year ago. It should have been fully tested. And who knows? I mean, maybe the Patriots are going to be going in porta potties outside if the bathrooms aren't ready.
Well, what arena does that remind you of? Because the Joe Louis Arena for the All-Star game back in 1979-80, the All-Star game was at Joe Louis Arena. Gordie Howe famously played in that game and got a standing ovation, although at that time he was a Hartford Whaler. I believe Wayne Gretzky played in his very first All-Star game that year.
He did.
And they said that the arena wasn't ready. That arena, the people were using these stairways as urinals. So it was not ready to play in. And that reminds me of what you just said. maybe they'll have porta potties around the Milan rink.
All right. Let's not piss anybody else off here and move on to some personnel notes. For the Anaheim Ducks, they snap an 0-8-1 slide, defeating the Dallas Stars on Tuesday 3-1. They play this game without Troy Terry, Leo Carlson, and Carter Gauthier with an illness. And they get Jacob Trouba back. But in winning this game at home, you could see that the Ducks' approach, without having three forwards, they had to defend better. And this was probably the best game that they've had in a month, both protecting their goaltender, Lucas Dostal, but also in terms of being mindful of their defensive assignments. Their gap control was better. Their support of the puck in their own end was better. And I think this is the kind of game that Joel Quenneville is looking to see more consistently out of his Ducks.
And because we were just talking about the New York Rangers a while ago, let me remind everyone that 2 of the 3 goals the Ducks scored last night were by Chris Kreider and Jacob Trouba. So,
yes.
Interesting notes. Trouba just back from injury as well. Yeah. He missed a couple of games.
And for Dallas, Miro Heiskanen missed that game against the Ducks due to personal reasons because he had played 25 minutes and 55 seconds in the win in Los Angeles the night before. For the Edmonton Oilers, goaltender Tristan Jarry and defenseman Jake Wallman, both off LTIR, and they both played in the overtime loss in Nashville. Jarry took a little bit of a gamble coming out of the net, trying to deflect the puck away, and Roman Josi wound up scoring the game-winning goal. But even though this was the second of the back-to-back, for the Oilers, you would have expected a little bit more from them. And this is the inconsistency that we continue to see every other game with this club. You think, okay, they're ready to really go on this run, win 8 out of 9 or whatnot, and then they just can't string it together, even though, as we look at the standings on Wednesday morning, they're tied atop the Pacific Division with the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, it's just, you just don't know. They're not the team that they've been in the past few years, in the second half of the past few years, when, every night they rip off another win. Their power play's playing at 60%. Draisaitl's scoring buckets, and McDavid's doing marvelous things, and Bonehead Bouchard is putting bombs in from the point. They're just not that same team. So I'm interested to see how this year turns out for Edmonton with those 2 generational players, McDavid and Draisaitl.
And the first of which now has a 20-game point-scoring streak. Keeper Sherwood for the Vancouver Canucks missed the losses at Montreal on Monday and at Ottawa on Tuesday. He is expected to be out anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. But what I find interesting here is that he is very highly sought on the trade market, and it's being reported that up to 20 teams are looking to get this guy in their lineup. I mean, he's a good goal scorer. He throws his body around, but almost 2/3 of the league want this guy.
But how does this get out? How does this come out? Like, is there somebody in Vancouver telling people this? I mean, what is going on in Vancouver? I mean, that would not, when I was even in New York, that wouldn't have gotten out of my office that 20 teams were interested in one of my players. You're supposed to keep that quiet. So, I mean, every time we look around, it seems like Vancouver's going to make another trade. And it's all public. Everything is public about the Canucks.
What's going on in Vancouver? What's going on in Jersey? Because you remember that Dougie Hamilton was a healthy scratch in Winnipeg. So then comes back the next night in the lineup, 2 assists, +3, joking around with his teammates. And the Devils get a much-needed 5-2 win in Minnesota, with contributions also coming from Jesper Bratt and Andre Palat, who have not produced nearly what was expected this year. Simon Nemec was scratched on Monday in Minnesota, but now he's expected back in the lineup on Wednesday against Seattle. So Dougie Hamilton's been in the league way too long for him to be getting showcased. So this is just very bizarre with the in and the out of the lineup. I mean, are they going to move this guy? They're not going to move this guy?
It's another head scratcher by Sheldon Keefe. Those decisions are not made by the GM. I never said who would be in the lineup and who would be out of the lineup when I was GM. That's all on Sheldon Keefe and how he runs his team and his player personnel night to night. It's another thing that's head scratching that goes along with leaving Markstrom in for 9 straight goals and, as we said, scratching Dougie Hamilton from that game. And I don't know.
And Markstrom was actually the goalie for the Devils in that surprise win in Minnesota. And a couple of notes coming out of the Pittsburgh Penguins camp. Defenseman Erik Karlsson expected to be out at least 2 weeks with a lower body injury. And forward Blake Lizotte had a good season for the Pens thus far. Extends for 3 years, $6.75 million. That's $2.25 million AAV. Anything from your side?
Some good news if you're a Caps fan. Tom Wilson, who we all know how important he is to the Washington Capitals, is on the ice today for practice after the injury bug had hit him.
That'll wrap up our show for today. Special thanks to Vince Mercogliano from The Athletic for joining us.
And to all of you that are out there listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you if you leave us a review. Get us either Neil or Vic at NHLWraparound.com with an email. All of our podcasts are on all platforms, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. As I said before, please leave us a review or hit the subscribe button. You can find us on X. My handle is at NYC Neil. The show's handle is at NHL Wraparound. We're also on Instagram and TikTok with NHL Wraparound, and newly put on RayD8.tv. We're on that network, so look for us there as well.
And before we shift over to the website, just want to make mention of our latest YouTube subscribers, Jonathan Akers, Randy Crockford, Monica Bialicor, and Ryan Sewer. So thanks to them and welcome aboard. Our website is NHLWraparound.com. We are undergoing a little bit of maintenance while we switch hosting platforms. We will now be part of the Believe Network, so that will take place probably sometime early next week. But our blog section still open. We have New York centric. Last piece by Patrick Hoffman about the Rangers hitting rock bottom, and that's what this show has primarily been about. But we also have Neil's Nuggets and Smith's Picks. And, you know, you've been on this rager really for the better part of the last week. You are well over 100 games, over the 500 mark. But I want to point something out to you that I think you have definitely overlooked. And now I'm looking for a few bouquets to be thrown my way. You know what this is?
No, I have no idea.
Okay. So on Short Shifts Monday, I had pointed out very specifically the Buffalo-Anaheim game that was played on Saturday, where it was a 4-1 lead for the Sabres, and the Ducks got it to within a goal before giving up an empty netter. And I said that it looked like the Sabres may be falling into some bad habits, and that by virtue of the late push, maybe the Ducks were going to pull out of things. And on Monday, the Sabres lost to the Florida Panthers. And on Tuesday, the Ducks break their winless streak against the Dallas Stars. Come on. What do you say?
Well, pretty good analysis from my partner.
And that's also coming on the heels of saying that the Jets were going to break their losing streak last Friday.
You got a crystal ball.
Yeah, well, something like that. So stay tuned, because I think I may have to get in on this prediction thing a little bit more often.
Well, you go ahead. Vic's picks.
I think it's forthcoming for sure. Take care, everyone. Short shifts coming up on Friday.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.